Good afternoon. We will get started here. Thank you all for joining us today for a town hall discussion with Congressman Adam Smith and special guests, State Senator Karen Keiser and State Representative Tina Orwall. If you'd like to ask a question during today's discussion, please enter your question into the Q&A chat if you are on Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, enter your questions in the Facebook live chat. If you have a personal inquiry on specific cases, updates on your applications, or other related matters, please reach out to Congressman Smith's office using our website, adamsmith.house.gov/contact. Before we turn to questions, we'll hear briefly from Congressman Smith, followed by Senator Keiser and Representative Orwall, who will all provide opening remarks. Congressman Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you all for joining. Just want to go over a couple of quick things, focused on Sea-Tac Airport. And then also I think there are some interesting things going on with the broader infrastructure packages that we're working on back in Congress that are helpful to this as well. But there continues to be several basic approaches. One, we want the community's voice to be heard more by the port and by the FAA. Now, many of you have heard me talk about this at length before, so I won't do that. Short story is port's doing better. FAA is still doing horribly, is the easiest way to sum that up. I think there is outreach in the community, and I've spoken to the FAA administrator, both locally and nationally, to explain our disappointment that their idea of an ombudsman is basically, well, I think of it as a company union for those of you who follow such things. The idea that, okay, they will identify a group of people who they will interact with in the community instead of being open to a wide variety of voices in our community and hearing from them. And we're working to sort of push the FAA to understand that when they operate in airport communities, their job isn't just to maximize flow and profits in and out of the airport. Their job is also to be good members of that community and to try to work with local community members to protect them to the greatest extent possible. We're not there yet. We're going to keep pushing on it. But as I said, I think the port has done quite a bit of outreach, and that's a start. It's not a result. The other couple of big issues are, I should say, by the way, that I'm working with a coalition in Congress to introduce an airport communities piece of legislation to force that type of communication, conversation, and inclusion. To make it part of the charter of the FAA to be concerned about what's going on in the community. Other two big issues are, particulates and the impact that this could potentially have on air quality in and around airports. Number one big challenge there off the top is to really get the data on that, to take a look and see what is happening around airports as you have so many increasing numbers of airplanes coming in over burning off fuel and having that burned off fuel dropping down onto our communities. So we're working to get a study to look at that. I know Tina and Karen are also working on the issue of how we can improve the air quality within schools around those communities. We can certainly do that for other folks as well. If those bad particulates are coming into the air, how do we filter them out within buildings? Now, obviously, that doesn't help if you're gardening in your backyard and the stuff's dropping on you. But cleaning up the air inside of buildings is a step that we could take. And we really, really want to push that issue. And then there's the broader noise mitigation issue. We're trying again to get the port and the FAA to take more responsibility for reducing the impact of the noise that happens around airports. One big issue that we're working on is this idea, well, we need to change the policy. Policy right now is if they do noise mitigation in a given area, even if that noise mitigation fails, or even if we determine that it really wasn't effective, the FAA's position right now is they can't spend any money on that. We want to change that policy. I know a number of you have had experiences where noise mitigation was done on individual homes and schools and community, and it hasn't worked. And we're coming back and saying, please fix it, please update it. And they're saying, we are not allowed to spend dollars on that. I don't really agree with that interpretation to begin with. So we're pushing them on that. We're also pushing to change the law to get better, broader noise mitigation efforts. Just quickly on the infrastructure packages. I guess the biggest area of the focus is to get, and I forget the initials off the top of my head, basically to have planes fly on less damaging fuel. The idea of shifting them over to biofuels. And there's a lot of studies need to go in to make sure that the biofuels that are being used are being produced in a climate friendly way. I think this is something we really need to push. To try and get to the point where the airplanes are not dropping as poisonous a material down onto people. I was just over at Washington State University. My son is a cougar. After 3 huskies in the family, he went his own way, which is really cool. Actually, Pullman's great, but they're doing a ton of work over there on liquid hydrogen as a fuel source. This has massive potential to be, first of all, it's abundant. You can get to scale on it. It's much cleaner burning. It's easier to store. Ton of issues there, but want to try to pursue that. The other thing that I should mention about the physical infrastructure bill, called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, or sadly BIF for short, has a provision in it to really expand high-speed rail. And this is relevant in the airport world because a lot of the trips that come in and out of Sea-Tac are short hops. People going to Spokane, people going to Portland. If we had a better train system, that would be a more reasonable alternative and could help reduce train traffic. At the moment, those infrastructure packages are, as I like to put it, pretty thoroughly wrapped around the axle in terms of getting passed. But I think it's really important that we get them done, both on the human infrastructure reconciliation side and then on the physical infrastructure side. So that's sort of top level what we're working on. I want to get to your questions, so I'll stop there. And I do want to thank both Karen and Tina for their tireless work on this issue, and for joining us this evening. And they're also incredible resources from me. I mean, they're on the ground close to it, and they're in constant touch with my office on things that we can do to be helpful. So I appreciate that. And I'll turn it over to Senator Keiser for her opening remarks. And again, thank you for being here.
Well, I want to thank Adam for hosting this town hall meeting on this really important topic for our communities. And I want to thank your staff for putting all the hours of work into this and getting and generating the kind of interest to have this conversation. And I want to also thank you for your work at the federal level. In that, by the way, BIF infrastructure bill, there's some good money also for a new airport to be developed, I think. We'll find it, I think. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing as a state to look at finding new commercial aviation facilities in our state. In 2019, I passed Senate Bill 5370 with a lot of help from my friends, like my seatmate Tina Orwall, and it basically established a commercial aviation coordinating commission, which is charged with choosing locations for future commercial aviation facilities. We have been somewhat hampered by the pandemic. It makes meeting, and especially open public meetings, really difficult. We are currently in the middle of a virtual open public meeting that's going to go on for about 3 weeks. And people are invited and encouraged to add their comments and concerns in that forum. We'll also have, I believe, some in-person meetings before we get too far down this road. But let me say, we've been, and Representative Tina Orwall is on this commission with me, along with Steve Edmondson, who's a very active and brilliant member of our community on these issues. So we have come to a point where we've identified those facilities already in place that could perhaps carry some commercial activities. And that those facilities, of course, include Painfield up in Everett, which is already running commercial flights and could expand up to about 100 flights a day, we think. Arlington Municipal Airport, Bremerton National Airport, Sanderson Field in Shelton, Tacoma Narrows, and also way down in South Lewis County, the Ed Carlson Memorial Field. Another one that we had originally identified was Olympia Airport. We had a huge backlash from the local community. So temporarily, Olympia is off that chart of various general aviations that could be expanded to commercial aviation facilities. None of these current facilities are perfect, and they have many limitations, and many of them are surrounded by communities, just like our communities surrounding Sea-Tac, and are resisting the idea of having a full-blown commercial aviation facility in their backyards. So we are now beginning to turn our attention to finding greenfield sites that could be built out from scratch into a commercial aviation facility. And so that's underway in a very preliminary way at this point. And I can't identify any particular place, but I just want you to know there's a lot of work being done on the ground by the staff of the State Transportation Department and by the commissioners, who many of whom are incredibly well versed in the needs of aviation. We're looking at sustainable aviation fuels. We're looking at electric planes and other issues that are really down the road. But when you think about building an airport, that's a 20-year project. That doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 5 years. It's a generational issue. So we need to think forward to about 2050 as we're making these plans. And that's pretty tough stuff because nobody can totally predict what's going to happen over the next 20, 25 years. I mean, who predicted that we would be shutting down our airport for almost a 12-month period for COVID when there's been very little aircraft activity? It's coming back slowly, but it gave us a break for a while. That's a good thing. I just want you to know that we're continuing to work on this Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission. It is not complete. It is a process, and we're going to, by hopefully February of 2022, or I'm sorry, October of 2022, name the top 2 sites that we would like to use possibly as a location for expanded commercial aviation facilities. That's about a year away. We don't have a lot more time. So I'll stop with that. And Adam, do you want me to just throw it to Tina?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Karen.
So my cohort in all things airport and aviation and health is our wonderful representative, Tina Orwall. And she has taken the Move Up study, which has been groundbreaking in its findings about ultrafine particles, and the Seattle-King County Health Department study, which has been very concerning, and put wheels in motion on making change. Tina.
Well, thank you, Senator Keiser, for those kind remarks. And it's such an honor to be here with both of you tonight. You have been doing this work for many years, and so it's such an honor to team up with you. And I feel so good about the work we're doing. And, you know, it's challenging to have an airport in your community, especially one of the fastest growing airports. And Representative Smith, you have just been such a champion for our community, and you understand it on a very personal level, having grown up in our area. You understand what it means. And so I want to thank you and your staff. Karen and I are in meetings with your staff all the time, and they are amazing. And I have to do a special shout out to Alex Stone, who I think is in every airport meeting I have. So, you know, one of the things I thought about today is what gives me hope. It's overwhelming having an airport, but I think there is hope. And I think the work that Karen's been doing, really leading this, looking at additional airport is groundbreaking. I mean, that really, and we've learned so much about what it means to have an airport in a community that really the state can step in and really show the kind of community agreements and work that should be done. The other thing that really gives me hope is the partnerships. So much of the work we're doing is, I call it a trifecta for change, and it's our community leaders, which we have many of, who are probably on the call tonight on this live stream, who have teamed up with leaders, the federal leaders, state leaders, our cities, along with research. And I really think that trifecta has been very effective. And in Washington State, we've really teamed up with the University of Washington. And they came in with some state funding a few years ago, along with city funding, to really look at the footprint of the airport. And that's when we started learning about the ultrafine particles from the Jet A fuel. And they had done this work in LAX and Atlanta, so we were actually their third airport. And so we began to kind of measure the ultrafine particles in the community. And one of the things that we learned pretty quickly is that they are pretty concentrated and they do stay in our area. And so the next step was really understanding, well, what does that mean? And what does it mean to our schools and our children? And we began to learn through a study really looking at the schools and airport quality that the University of Washington is doing, is that a lot of that ultrafine particles go inside and they can measure that in schools. But the good news is by using things like HEPA filters, you can greatly reduce that concentration. And so we are taking those lessons and trying to see how we expand those. The good things about a lot of these HEPA filters is they also impact COVID, they impact smoke and the ultrafine particles. And so again, we're learning what we can be doing. We're looking at mitigation on noise. I know Karen and I kind of teamed up to allow some of these older packages and homes to be fixed. We need to work with our partners like Adam at the federal level to begin to identify the dollars so we can go back into homes. And how do we expand that? And how do we really help the community address both the noise and the air quality? So I'm excited to be here tonight and answer your questions, and thank you.
Great, thank you all so much. We will now turn to the Q&A portion of the town hall. In advance of the event, we asked attendees to submit questions. So we'll start with a few of those, and then we'll turn to the live Q&As that we're getting both via Zoom and also in Facebook Live. So the first question over to Congressman Smith. You already touched briefly on what you're doing at the federal level and then sort of how the Build Back Better and infrastructure bills would address this issue. So we'll turn to climate now. We face a climate emergency, and there is currently no such thing as a climate-friendly flight. How are you working to reduce air travel and air shipping while transitioning workers to other industries and providing efficient, affordable, sustainable travel and shipping options in its place?
Yeah, I think that's, first of all, the source of fuel to make us go, period, is enormously important. And I really think that liquid hydrogen is going to be a huge part of that to get us to a better fuel source. I also think biofuels, the biggest thing we're doing is making investments, tax credits and anything we can do to encourage the development of alternative sources of fuel that are clean burning. One big thing I'm doing as chairman of the Armed Services Committee is pushing the Department of Defense to be a leader on this. They use a lot of fuel given the size of their budget, and they have made investments in various technologies that can help increase those efficiencies. Last 4 years were a little difficult because we had a White House that did not believe in climate change and was actually actively trying to undermine all of this. But I really feel that we have the technology, the ability, the resources to develop that future so that we're not dependent upon fossil fuels for this. And that should apply to the airline industry as well. Now, I will admit that it is easier, I think, to get a cleaner burning fuel in a train than it is in an airplane. So part of it is the high-speed rail. I saw a couple of questions in the chat there along those lines. I think that's a direction we need to go. And that's one of the many reasons why these infrastructure bills are so important, is to make those investments in that infrastructure. Last thing I'll say is I do think simply reducing travel itself would be an important part of it. And I hope that's, one tiny, tiny little silver lining that we all learned that virtual meetings are actually okay. And I don't think they're a complete substitute for human interaction, but there are a lot of meetings now that I think can be done virtually where you wouldn't have to get on that plane and take that business trip. And I think, I don't know yet what sort of the public policy way would be to encourage that. But I think you're right. I mean, it's good to develop better fuels. It's good to develop trains as an alternative, but it's also good to create the options so that people don't take the trip in the first place. And that's sort of the comprehensive approach that I think we need to take.
Great. Senator Keiser or Representative Orwall, in whichever order, could you talk a little bit about the discussions that are happening in your communities regarding preventing or at least reducing flights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.?
A bone of contention and frustration is what that is. Unfortunately, the FAA trumps the local jurisdictions, and we have no ability to ban flights between 11 and whatever. It's unfortunate because it's obvious that those late night, overnight flights really disrupt people's sleep, and sleep disruption on a routine basis creates health outcomes that are negative for everybody. And I know that personally. So we are extremely unhappy with that FAA standard. There are some exceptions to this rule. For instance, John Wayne Airport in Orange County got grandfathered in because it was a county-owned airport with time restrictions way back when, and it carried forward. But unfortunately, when it comes to Sea-Tac, the airport says it has no standing. Now, we do work with airlines. Tina had a conversation, I believe, with an airline recently to try and talk them out of sending their noisy freight planes in overnight, because that's one of the ones that come in over the night hours. And it's a piece by piece effort. Let me tell you, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate those comments, Karen. And, you know, there's that 2 a.m. flight that many of us woke up to many times, and that was a flight to Taiwan. And so, you know, I have opportunities to talk to some of their ambassadors to our state, and we did have a conversation, and they really did go back to try to move that passenger flight and try to use newer planes with their cargo. So we are trying to have dialogues that are kind of beyond the traditional ones. And so far we've had a good response. I also understand that the port is working on this as well. There's a startup committee. I don't think any legislators serve on it, but I do appreciate that they're looking at evening hours. The other thing we did is when Karen's bill to set up the siting of a third airport, we did add language about having community agreements. And we really think there's a role for the state to step in and start having those conversations. And so we are trying to get some traction at the state level on that as well. But we do know with health conditions and the success of our children and their health and their ability to study, they need to get a good night's sleep. And this needs to continue to be a high priority to address this.
Senator Orwall, back to you again, actually. What should your constituents know about air filters if we do live near Sea-Tac Airport, and how much of a difference do they make in homes? And finally, is there a certain type that we should be buying?
That is a great question. And I've been learning a lot on this topic the last couple of years, working with the University of Washington and with Boston. We have a team, we've teamed up with Boston Logan and their advocates and researchers, and they have been doing work with children with asthma and using air purifiers in homes. They use the brand Austin. I have not personally researched that, but that's what they used. And they found that it was between a 70 to 80% reduction in ultrafine particles in the home. And they were also looking at health outcomes for these children. So we've been sharing information between the University of Washington and Olin University. And one of our next steps was to go into the schools, which we have started to do with support of the cities and state, and look at those air purifiers. So we are looking on our own in our classrooms in the Federal Way and Highline school districts in a number of those classrooms at what kind of reductions we'll see with these air purifiers. But it's very promising. We do find that that even though they're so fine, these ultrafine particles, they actually can be filtrated out. And so I think that is the good news. And so far it looks very promising. I guess there's a website the researchers have done that look at the efficiency of HEPA filters and air purifiers. And if you want to reach out to my office, I will track that down for you.
Excellent. Mr. Smith, could you talk a little bit about whatever work has been done to improve the FAA's relationship with Boeing to prevent things like the 737 MAX debacle from happening again?
Yeah, I think, again, that was made more difficult by the fact that that went down during the Trump administration. And we're just now sort of getting reset up. But look, it's really not complicated. The FAA, it appears in that instance, really didn't do the oversight that they should have been doing, and they didn't get the cooperation from Boeing that they should have received. I confess I haven't dove into all of the legal documents and looked at it. I've had some conversations. I've looked at some of it. But I think, on a surface level, it's pretty clearly the case that, there's the enthusiasm for deregulation, the enthusiasm for, giving, corporations more of a free hand in these sorts of things led to some very significant problems. And, certainly the loss of life in the plane crashes is awful. It also has a devastating impact on the workers. I know, I represent that area in Renton where the 737 plant is at. Workers take their jobs very, very seriously. And it was a huge, huge tragic blow to have that, to have those crashes that occurred. We need better oversight. And I've had conversation with the Boeing company about this. And I think they need to be more responsive to it. And the FAA needs to do a better job of, doing their job, which is basically, making sure that the plane meets the safety requirements and inspections and that they don't cut corners. And the 737 MAX was shut down for several years as a result of that as well. So, I also worked, I know Rick Larson, a member from Northeast, the chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee on Transportation. He has done a number of oversight hearings on this. And they need to do better going forward. And we're going to continue to put pressure on them to make sure that they do.
Maintaining the theme here of the FAA, when the third runway was being proposed, the FAA told everyone that it was going to be used for inclement weather only, but the runway is now used every day, no matter the weather conditions. What can we do to get stakeholders like the FAA to be honest and more responsive to community concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Karen and Tina go here in just a second, but that's the biggest reason behind the piece of legislation that we're working on with airport impact communities, to actually put it in their charter that they are supposed to be representing the community around the airport, not just the airport. Because right now, as we well know, in this whole process, the community is simply an inconvenience for them. They view their job as moving, passengers and freight in and out of the airports as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And look, I mean, let's not kid ourselves that that's not important. That is important. My father worked at the airport. That's the reason I'm here. There are a lot of jobs, a lot of economic flows come from that, but I don't see any reason why you can't balance it better. And as we knew throughout that third runway fight, we just didn't have a voice. So I'm working to change that through that piece of legislation. I don't know, Karen, Tina, you want to comment on your experiences along those lines?
Well, it's been a 20-year nightmare that the Port of Seattle insisted on building a third runway and lying about its purpose. It was put forward and presented as a bad weather runway. It has been used as a capacity building runway. And it has been really a broken promise to all of us and our communities. And I hold a real grudge about that. That's one of the reasons why I'm continuing to fight this fight.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more. And Karen and I both live in Des Moines, and those planes are pretty much nonstop on that third runway. And that is not what was told to our community. And I do think, and I appreciate, Adam, your office. We've been trying to do more dialogue with the FAA and educate them about community impacts in the research we're doing to kind of open up that dialogue. And it is interesting. Their headquarters is in Des Moines, under one of the runways. I was hoping they'd have like a open cafe on the roof or something so that they could really understand what the community goes through. But it is a sore point, and we certainly want to find a way to engage them and educate them, I think, on the impact our community faces.
All right, we're going to pivot now to some live questions coming from the chat. So I'll do a little editorializing for readability's sake. But there are so many large airports in Western Washington. This constituent feels very strongly it's time for the Port of Seattle to be less greedy and spread the air traffic around the region. So is there a reason that that is not being implemented? And is there, will there be a second airport?
Well, I think, Karen covered a lot of the details on this. And I think, this was what back in it was in the late 80s when or mid 80s when they first started talking about the third runway. So it's really over 30 years that we've been wrestling with this. And at the time when I was, I was not an elected official, and then I was in 1990. The problem is the Port of Seattle is a county-wide entity. And they run the airport. So, as Karen mentioned, when you go to try to locate in Olympia or some of these other communities, it's that local authority. We battled this up in Everett for a very long time. And that local jurisdiction is right around there, and they are more directly responsive to their constituents, because their constituents are right there. Whereas, port commissioners are not. They're not dependent upon the votes right around the airport in order to be port commissioners, because it's the whole county. And what I felt that we needed was a statewide authority. And gosh, we've come at this from every conceivable angle.
Yep.
Even my predecessor, the state senator that I beat to get my job. I mean, I will have to say Eleanor Lee, she was trying to do it too. I was young enough and ignorant enough to believe, if I get in there, we can just fix it. But no, we have not. What we need a statewide entity, that looks at the entire, state and our true needs to then spread them out. There is no rational argument to have the concentration of air traffic at Sea-Tac that we have. No other major metropolitan area has such a concentrated amount of air traffic in one place. But that's where the power resides. The other jurisdictions have the power to block it. And the Port of Seattle and Sea-Tac Airport have the power to expand it for those reasons that I just stated. So I would continue to push for a more regional approach. And you could not have better advocates than Karen and Tina on the legislative level to try and do that. But that's the reality of why we've wound up on the short end of the stick.
Yep.
Representative Orwall, over to you now. When will we begin eliminating the lead pollution caused by leaded aviation fuels formulated for and used by reciprocating engine propeller-driven aircraft?
That is a great question. And I know, I think it's a Boeing Field has those smaller aircraft that are still using the leaded fuel. And I know I've had some conversations with the county on this, and I really do think the state and the county need to really work on this and to come up with a strategy of how they can move away from that. And I don't know if we'll end up talking, about new technology and other things for small aircraft. I think that's probably, as we embrace electric airplanes, it's probably going to start with small craft. But in the meantime, I think we need to find a way to work with that jurisdiction to eliminate the leaded fuels. It's very sad. I mean, I know they're eliminated in the Jet A fuel, but it's time for all fuel to not have leaded.
Yeah, I mean, that should be the low-hanging fruit of this battle.
Mhm.
It's a
Right.
big, it's a more complicated thing, but yeah, you shouldn't be flying around with leaded fuel. And it's simply, we put emission standards in cars and upgraded and improved them, and we should do the same thing in airplanes.
With continued air pollution in our communities, is the state or aviation industry working on expanding alternative fuels, which we've discussed here a little bit already today?
Yes, actually we are. And I don't know if you're aware, but we have a refinery up there in, oh gosh, what's the area where all the refineries are in northern.
Anacortes?
Anacortes area. And I believe it's the BP refinery that is looking at switching over to biofuels. And the question there is, do we have enough feedstock to provide the production, that level of biofuels that they would need for that large refinery. But they are very seriously looking at moving from fossil petroleum fuels to biostock, what they call sustainable aviation fuels.
And the thing I would add to that, and I do need to do a shout out for Representative Joe Fitzgibbon with the clean fuel standards. And we've made a lot of progress as a state. It's voluntary for aviation at this point, and some of the pieces I hear is what Karen raised is can we take it to scale? I also think we need to understand, and I think Adam, you've been looking at the federal level to make sure we're researching, the benefits of biofuels as we expand that. But again, I think there's really good work. It's trying to figure out how to take it to scale. The other thing I would note, though, is when UW looked at the concentration of ultrafine particles, they're highly concentrated when a plane is landing. So that would also speak to the importance of a national strategy, because it depends on where the plane fueled up as far as a lot of the pollution we're seeing.
Yeah, aviation is a global industry, and so you can have local sustainable aviation fuels going into your planes, but the planes that are coming in from Singapore or from London or from New York might have gotten fueled up with fossil fuels. So this really does call for a national policy and national standards.
Pivoting to a very specific question here, and I'll defer to the representatives on the call who's best to answer it, but how can a single homeowner in the approach or departure corridor of Sea-Tac, just outside of the noise mitigation limits, be assured that our neighborhood is restudied? Our neighborhood is currently at 500 feet elevation and miraculously is on the fringe of a designated noise boundary established for lower elevations.
Well, I think this is, a part of the legislation that if there's sort of three broad categories on the federal level that we're pushing legislation on, number one is, like I said, getting the impacted communities around airports to have a greater voice in these decisions and what goes on at the airport. Number two is dealing with the pollution, and number three is dealing with the noise. And I think there has been a very restrictive approach by the FAA to dealing with noise. And again, it's all part of sort of driving the bottom line. They want to spend less on that and more on expanding air travel. And I think that is a misunderstanding of their responsibility to this country, frankly, because, the FAA, they are part of the federal government, which exists because of us. They need to be more responsive to the needs of people, and they need to really understand the impacts of that noise and expand the protections that they give to people, because we've all fought these battles. They put a noise barrier here, they change, and then you don't get this, we won't replace that. It is pushing a boulder up a hill every single time to get them to give us the noise mitigation that people need. And we've got to change that. They've got to embrace the idea that let's protect people to the maximum extent possible, not to the minimum extent required.
Thank you. That's really well said. And it does seem like even how they measure noise is so archaic. And one of the ways they document the noise in our areas through a Part 150 study, but right after they did the last one, they came next gen and all the flight patterns changed. And so many homes are impacted that have no noise packages. And so we need to open up that conversation to be able not only to fix old noise packages, but to do new ones. And maybe it should be noise and air quality mitigation. And so there's a lot of work ahead, but you raise an excellent point.
Another constituent here is so glad that you were talking about the third runway. We live right under it, and it is just awful at times. What kind of legislation would be required to manage this more effectively? Because it's clear that the port is not accountable.
Well, the port is accountable to its commissioners who are elected. And this is not a political issue in terms of what I am saying, but there is an election in November. And commissioners who are elected need to hear from citizens and from airport communities, in particular South King County. Currently, we don't have much of a voice, not much representation. We need more representation.
I think that's
And now
absolutely. I'm sorry, just one quick. I think it's absolutely true. I will say that, the one little piece of good news is in 30 years of doing this, we have gotten even commissioners who aren't in the area to be more responsive to us than they used to be. I agree with your assessment. And Karen, I've been trying to dance around that particular issue as the election's coming up here in less than 3 weeks myself. And I'll not, I have endorsed people, but I don't want to particularly talk about that. That's, up to individual decisions. But let me just say, no matter who's on the commission, I think our community can reach out to them. And look, in part of the expanding of the airport, I represent Beacon Hill as well. And I'm sure there's people from Beacon Hill on here as well. We have port commissioners up in that area as well. So that the noise pattern and the impacts of the airport have expanded in the last 30 years. So there are more communities that individual port commissioners have to be responsive to. So we should continue to put pressure on them and try to get their voice. And they have been doing better in the last decade plus or so as a result of that pressure. So that can work too.
And I agree, Adam. They are doing better. It's just that they were so bad. But
it's a low bar to jump over. Yes. We're not actually suing each other at the moment. So, I guess that's an improvement because, sorry to tell stories here. We're going back to the second runway. I mean, it wasn't until the late 90s that, I worked with, then director of the port. Gosh, what was that guy's name? I can't remember anyway. I had it lost it. Mick Dinsmore. And we finally got an agreement, with the state and the port and the FAA to mitigate the second runway, which was built, I think, in the early 70s, mid 70s, something like that. So yeah, it took a while, but we're doing better. We've got a lot of room to improve.
Yeah, and I just want to do a shout out to the community because I feel like I've seen so many organized events to try to educate port commissioners. And I just want to say thank you. I think that's such an important part the community can do to address these issues.
We understand Senator Keiser does have a hard stop here coming up shortly. So we are, while there are many more questions we could get to, we are unfortunately out of time. So Senator Keiser, if you've got to jump here in a minute, we want to make sure that you've got the opportunity to get one last word in before we have to end this evening.
Well, thank you very much. And I have to thank Congressman Smith for providing this forum. This is such a valuable and educational process for all of us. So we learn from each other when we have these interactions. And I really want to thank the dozens. We had up to 150 people on at one time on this conversation today. And this is how we learn from each other and have more ability to act. And thank you all for participating because we expect to hear from you. This is a long haul. This is not a quick silver bullet. It's not a bumper sticker. This is tough, grinding, long work. But we can do this if we keep our eye on it and we keep working at it and chip away at it and pick away at it and make progress. Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you, Karen. Great to see you as always.
Congressman Smith, Representative Orwall, if there are any other closing remarks you'd like to make before we wrap up this evening's call.
I just want to thank Adam and for your leadership. It's great to be here tonight. It's such an important dialogue. It's something, as you know, we think about every day because we live near an airport. And again, I want to thank the community members. I have hope. I have seen so much great work done the last several years through our partnerships, and I feel like we're gaining traction and that we'll just keep building on it. So again, thank you and appreciate everyone's participation.
Well, thank you. I'll just close by again thanking both Tina and Karen for participating and also for their years now of working on this issue and coming at it from every conceivable angle as Karen described. And I really appreciate that. And I do think, there is cause for optimism here. We can certainly better protect communities from the noise, and we can have cleaner burning, less polluting ways of flying aircrafts and transporting people. I mean, that technology is available. We need to invest in it and embrace it, and we can better protect communities in that way. I think that can absolutely be done if we are willing to be bold and invest in it. And I think, we got to keep pushing that national debate to embrace the idea that, climate change is a problem, but also air pollution is a problem, both in terms of noise and pollutants. If you don't want to get into the, argument about whether or not we're, heating the planet up to the point where we're going to kill everybody, you can just focus on the fact that, noise and air pollution negatively impacts life, all forms of life, not just human. Therefore we should try to mitigate it. And we have the technology, right here in the state of Washington, both at the University of Washington, Washington State University. We got some of the most incredible research and some of the brightest minds working on these technologies. And then we certainly don't lack for resources. Look at the wealth that has been generated in this region, and the Allen Foundation, the Gates Foundation. There's a lot of sources to get money to make the investments in this research to get the results and actually get the technology we need. That's what I'm really going to be focused on. And I know a lot of others are as well. So I think there is hope to get us to a better place, but we got to fight for it.
Thank you all for your participation in this evening's town hall. Congressman, thank you very much for hosting this town hall. If you've got additional inquiries, or if we did not have time to get to your question this evening, please reach out directly to Congressman Smith's office using, again, our website, and that's www.adamsmith.house.gov/contact. Thank you all and have a great evening. This concludes our town hall.
Thanks, Caleb.